Ramon entered the luxury store in the city center, passing through the glass doors with a calm yet determined walk. His eyes held a mixture of tenderness and pride, the same pride any grandfather would feel watching his granddaughter achieve something as significant as graduating with honors. He had come here to buy a watch, the perfect gift for Clara, who had shown relentless dedication to her studies, a sacrifice he understood well and had tried to support at every step. For Ramon, that watch symbolized all the sacrifices and love they had shared. But as soon as he crossed the door, he felt the disdainful gazes of the store employees strolling between the gleaming showcases. Around him, the employees exchanged looks filled with skepticism. Alicia, one of the sales associates, watched Ramon from her place at the counter, arms crossed and with a disapproving look. She was a young woman with dark hair carefully tied back, always attentive to the details of her appearance. Seeing the humble-looking old man wandering among the display cases, she let out a sigh, unable to hide her discomfort. In her eyes, there was nothing but disdain. From a distance, her colleague Carlos, the store manager, approached the counter with a mocking smile, whispering to Alicia that the man had probably come to the wrong place, or worse, had entered just to waste everyone's time. Carlos was a serious and formal-looking man, always dressed in a suit and tie, with an air of superiority that seemed to grow stronger at the sight of Ramon in the store. In his view, that store was no place for someone like him. Dressed in a simple checkered shirt and worn-out trousers, Ramon looked out of place among the luxury watches and jewelry shining under the carefully positioned lights to enhance the store's opulence. Despite the evident rejection in the air, Ramon did not let the glances and veiled comments from the employees discourage him. He had worked hard his entire life, facing prejudice and overcoming adversities far more significant than the disdain of two young salespeople. His purpose there was clear: to buy a gift for Clara, his beloved granddaughter. It was a special moment, a milestone that deserved to be celebrated with something meaningful, and nothing would make him abandon that idea. So he continued his tour around the store, ignoring the disapproving looks following him. Alicia, who had been observing Ramon's every move, decided it was time to intervene. With a voice full of condescension, she approached him and offered her assistance, though her attitude suggested she would rather be doing anything else. Ramon, however, looked at her calmly and asked her to show him one of the more elegant watches in the central display case, a gold model that had caught his eye since he entered. The sales associate was silent for a moment, evaluating his request with disbelief, and, without hiding her surprise, tried to dissuade him by directing him to a case with simpler, more affordable models. With a firm and measured voice, Ramon repeated his request, pointing again to the gold watch. Alicia, after a pause, opened the display case with a barely concealed look of annoyance, her movements slow and filled with distaste. She took out the watch and showed it to Ramon with a forced smile, aware that Carlos was watching from the back of the store, ready to intervene if he felt it necessary. Carlos crossed his arms and frowned, clearly irritated by the time Alicia was wasting on what, to him, was a lost sale. Ramon held the watch in his hands, carefully examining every detail of the design, the sturdiness of the strap, and the elegance of the numbers on the dial. For him, this watch represented more than just an object, it was a symbol of the love and dedication he had poured into his granddaughter's future. He could imagine Clara's expression when she received it, the sparkle in her eyes, and her smile, the same one that always moved him and reminded him why he had worked so hard in life. While Ramon held the watch, Alicia looked at him impatiently, and Carlos, unable to hold back, approached the counter with a sarcastic smile. In a mocking tone, Carlos explained to Ramon that this watch was no ordinary model but an exclusive, high-value piece, not something just any customer could afford. Ramon looked up and met the manager's gaze without a hint of shame. In his eyes, there was no submission, only a calm that threw Carlos off for a moment. Without a word, Ramon returned his attention to the watch, as if the disparaging remarks of both employees had no bearing on his decision. Alicia, visibly annoyed by Ramon's lack of reaction, tried to pressure him again, subtly suggesting that he might want to consider cheaper watches, more suited to his style. But Ramon was unfazed. That watch in his hands was exactly what he was looking for, and he wasn't about to let two arrogant employees make him doubt his choice. His dignity remained intact in the face of the arrogance of the two young people, who didn't understand that the value of a person isn't measured by their appearance. The employees exchanged one final glance, as if they were confident that Ramon would soon give up. To them, this man was merely a temporary nuisance, someone who would eventually realize he didn't belong there and leave the store empty-handed. But Ramon had no intention of leaving without the watch. He knew exactly what he wanted and had worked long enough in his life not to give in at the first sign of contempt. Ramon examined the watch with the same care he would use in choosing something of life or death importance. Every detail of the design, the delicacy of the numbers on the golden face, and the movement of the hands seemed to mesmerize him, for, in his mind, this watch wasn't just a luxury item but the perfect symbol of the effort, dedication, and love he felt for his granddaughter, Clara. However, Alicia and Carlos's eyes were filled with exasperation and impatience, unable to comprehend what this moment meant to Ramon. With a voice heavy with impatience, Alicia broke the silence, asking if he was done looking at the watch and suggesting it might be a good idea to consider simpler, more appropriate options for him. Ramon raised his gaze and saw the expression on the employee's face. In those eyes, barely able to mask their disdain, he recognized something he had seen many times throughout his life. He had met too many people who judged others by their appearance rather than their character. Yet, he didn't respond. Instead, he returned his gaze to the watch, once again immersed in the significance it held for him. Alicia, exasperated, glanced at Carlos, who gave her a knowing smile. Both were sure that at any moment, the old man would say thank you and leave. When Ramon finally spoke, he did so with a calm but firm voice, indicating that he had decided to buy the watch. The certainty in his words caused a brief moment of confusion in Alicia, who hesitated before reacting. Carlos, hearing Ramon's decision, approached and, with a mocking smirk, informed him of the price, indirectly emphasizing that it was a considerable sum, something he believed was clearly beyond the means of a man who looked like Ramon. Carlos even motioned to Alicia to set the watch aside, implying that the transaction probably wouldn't go through. Ramon kept his gaze fixed on the manager, showing no sign of nervousness or discomfort. He extended his hand toward the counter, expecting them to hand him the watch so he could take it to the payment area. With no choice, Carlos relented and returned the watch to him, though not without casting one last look of disapproval. Smiling, Ramon indicated he was ready to pay, and, unaffected by the prejudices of these two young people, he walked calmly to the cash register, the watch firmly in his hands. Alicia quickly took her place behind the register, and with a mix of curiosity and distrust, waited for Ramon to present his method of payment. In her mind, she couldn't imagine that a man with such a humble appearance could cover the cost of such an expensive watch. She assumed he would try to offer a modest credit card or, worse yet, that he would reconsider his decision at the last minute upon seeing the amount on the register screen. In a voice barely disguising her mocking tone, she asked him to hand over his card for processing, almost certain that, in a matter of seconds, this old man would leave the store empty-handed and with his head down. Ramon, unfazed, reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Alicia's eyes followed his every movement, filled with suspicion and a hint of impatience. Slowly, Ramon pulled out a black credit card, one reserved only for people with access to high-limit credit lines, a type of card that, in an instant, transformed Alicia's look of disbelief into one of surprise and confusion. Despite the revelation, she tried to maintain a neutral expression, though she couldn't prevent her hands from trembling slightly as she took Ramon's card. The store's atmosphere, once saturated with mockery and contempt, grew tense and uncomfortable. As Alicia processed the payment, Carlos approached, looking at the cash register screen and then at Ramon's card, unable to believe what he was seeing. It was as if they couldn't accept the idea that this humble-looking old man had access to such an exclusive credit card. Despite the prejudice they'd shown from the start, neither dared to say a word out loud, as the card in their hands spoke for itself, with an authority they couldn't ignore. Nevertheless, both kept expressions of disbelief, and although they tried to hide it, condescension lingered in their attitudes. As the payment went through, Ramon silently observed the transformation on Alicia and Carlos's faces. It wasn't the first time he'd been judged by his appearance, nor the first time he'd managed to surprise those who expected nothing of him. The years had taught him to remain steady and unaffected by others' opinions. He knew well that money doesn't define a person's dignity, let alone the quality of their character. For him, this purchase represented an act of love and pride for his granddaughter, a symbol of the faith he had in her and her future. Alicia, trying to keep her composure, handed him the bag with the watch, though her expression remained a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. Carlos, who had been observing in silence until then, stepped forward and, with a smile intended to be professional, wished Ramon a good day, though a barely concealed disdain was still evident in his tone. For them, this transaction was a lesson, but they didn't seem entirely capable of recognizing it. Ramon received the bag with genuine gratitude, showing no resentment or bitterness. He thanked both employees in a cordial tone, demonstrating that kindness doesn't depend on appearance or prejudice. He turned toward the exit, aware that despite Alicia and Carlos's attitudes, he had achieved his goal. In his heart, the value of that watch lay not in its price but in the meaning it held for him and Clara. As he walked away, Ramon's figure radiated a dignity that starkly contrasted with the pettiness of the employees, who still watched him from the back of the store, unable to comprehend the true value of that moment. Ramon moved confidently toward the store's exit, holding firmly to the bag that contained the cherished watch. Despite the discomfort he'd felt from the employee's treatment, his satisfaction was evident. In his mind, he was already imagining Clara's expression upon receiving the gift, a thought that filled him with a calm that neither Alicia's contempt nor Carlos's arrogance could take away. However, just before he reached the door, an impulse led Carlos, the manager, to call out to him from the counter with a tone that tried to mask impatience but failed to conceal his condescension. Carlos approached him, clasping his hands and forcing a smile that aimed to be cordial but was as strained as his previous attitude of disdain. He asked, loud enough for Alicia to hear, if he was satisfied with the purchase and if he was sure he wanted that particular model. There was a hint of mockery in his words, as if Carlos were trying, in some way, to have the last word in a game that Ramon, without even intending to, had already won. Alicia, from the register, held back a sarcastic smile, arms crossed and watching the scene with a mix of disbelief and apparent interest. Ramon paused for a moment and turned to face the manager, his calm unshaken. Carlos's eyes, now tense, seemed to search for some sign of insecurity in him, but all they found was unbreakable serenity. Without showing any annoyance, Ramon met Carlos's gaze and replied in a steady voice that indeed, that was the watch he wanted for his granddaughter, and he was more than satisfied with his choice. He thanked him again for the service and was about to turn away when, in an unexpected gesture, He took out his credit card and placed it on the counter, leaving it visible for an extra second, as if ensuring both employees could see it. Alicia and Carlos exchanged a quick glance, and their expressions shifted from mockery to evident unease. Neither could manage a word, and as they struggled to keep their composure, the store's atmosphere grew heavy, almost uncomfortable. The presence of that exclusive card, so far removed from what they had expected, was a revelation they couldn't ignore. Ramon slowly returned the card to his wallet, a gesture that seemed calculated to highlight the value of each second he chose to spend in that place. Unhurriedly, he continued, explaining calmly that his granddaughter, Clara, deserved this gift and so much more. She was a brilliant young woman who had faced enormous obstacles and, despite them, had never given up. Alicia's gaze shifted momentarily, visibly uncomfortable as she listened to the firmness in Ramon's words. Without warning, Ramon shifted to a deeper tone, fully capturing the attention of both employees. He told them that, over the course of his life, he had learned that true wealth was not in appearances but in character, dignity, and the kindness with which people treated one another. Carlos, surprised, opened his mouth as if he were going to respond, but his words died before they could be spoken. Ramon smiled slightly, though his eyes held a seriousness that made his words feel weightier. He explained that he had witnessed much injustice in his life and had learned never to judge anyone by their appearance, but by their actions. In that instant, Alicia lowered her gaze, seemingly crushed by the weight of Ramon's words. The atmosphere was filled with palpable discomfort, and the condescension that both employees had displayed just minutes before quickly crumbled in the face of the man's unbreakable dignity. Carlos, with a tense expression, struggled to recompose himself, but the shame burned on his face. Yet he still tried to mask his discomfort with a forced, rigid smile, as if trying to regain control of the situation. Noticing the tension, Ramon remained calm. He knew he had left an impression on these employees, and although he had never sought to humiliate them, he also wouldn't allow them to demean him without cause. His presence had somehow shaken the arrogance both employees had so easily displayed. Carlos, unsure of how to react, attempted to thank him again for his purchase, but his words sounded hollow, incapable of masking the embarrassment that was now evident in his tone. Alicia, on the other hand, stayed silent, watching Ramon with a mix of respect and bewilderment. With the watch safely in its bag and one last calm look, Ramon headed for the exit without looking back. His steps were slow but firm, each one a reminder that dignity could neither be bought nor sold. Just before he crossed the door, Carlos turned to Alicia and, in an almost inaudible whisper, said he couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. She, still processing the silent lesson Ramon had given them, simply nodded, her gaze lost in the void, as if each word the man had spoken continued to echo in her mind. The store door closed behind Ramon, and the echo of his words seemed to linger in the air. The revelation that this humble-looking man actually possessed a life and experience far deeper than they had imagined had left a mark on both employees' arrogance. Alicia felt ashamed and knew she had witnessed something that would stay with her for life. Carlos, on the other hand, tried to convince himself that the scene didn't mean anything, that he hadn't made a mistake, but in his heart, he knew he had been wrong from the start. Outside the door, Ramon took a deep breath. He knew a person's worth was not measured by their possessions or the respect of those who didn't understand the true meaning of humility. He walked away from the store, satisfied with having fulfilled his mission. His gift was, for him, the culmination of years of sacrifice and love for Clara, and nothing and no one could cloud the joy he felt knowing that, despite the prejudices others projected onto him, he had accomplished what he set out to do. As he left the store, the atmosphere inside remained tense and uncomfortable. Alicia and Carlos exchanged bewildered looks, unsure of what to say. The scene they had just witnessed had shaken their preconceptions, and for the first time, they began to question how they had judged that man. Alicia, who usually remained confident and steadfast in her opinions, now felt a knot in her throat, as if every word Ramon had spoken had hit her personally. Carlos appeared less moved on the outside, but something inside him had also shifted. Later that afternoon, as they discussed what had happened in the store, the front door opened again. Alicia and Carlos exchanged a look, surprised to see Ramon returning, though this time, he didn't have the same calm expression as before. His face showed a serious, determined look, which instantly unsettled both employees. Carlos was the first to approach, trying to maintain his managerial posture, though inside, the memory of Ramon's credit card still disturbed him. Approaching him, Carlos asked in a controlled tone how he could help him this time, though his curiosity was evident. Ramon stopped in the middle of the store, looking at both employees firmly. Alicia's eyes, this time, couldn't hold Ramon's gaze. She looked down at the floor or at any other object in the store. In a calm, firm voice, Ramon explained that he had returned because he wanted to clarify some details about his purchase. Carlos, somewhat puzzled by Ramon's insistence, nodded and moved a little closer, attentive to what the older man had to say. With unbreakable seriousness, Ramon asked if they knew anything about the history of the company they worked for. The silence from both employees was enough to confirm they had no idea what he was talking about. Then, with the calm only a man of his experience could have, Ramon revealed that he was the owner of that company, the very same one they had believed to be beyond someone of his style. Alicia and Carlos exchanged a look of utter disbelief, unable to process the information. Their faces showed a mix of shame and amazement, as if in that moment, they were reliving every scornful word and every arrogant gesture they had shown him. The sarcastic smile on Carlos's face disappeared completely, and his face paled as the truth sank in. Alicia, on her part, clutched her chest, trying to process the magnitude of her mistake. Ramon held his gaze on both of them, letting the weight of his words sink in. He explained that he had founded that chain of stores decades ago and that his goal had always been to provide exceptional service, regardless of a client's appearance or status. His intention, he said, was to create an environment where every person was treated with dignity and respect, something that both employees had clearly forgotten in their treatment of him. The silence in the store was overwhelming, and every word of Ramon's echoed in the air like an unavoidable lesson. Carlos tried to articulate an apology, stammering meaningless words that barely escaped his lips. Alicia, her eyes brimming with tears, couldn't lift her gaze, and in her mind, she replayed the scornful attitude she had shown just minutes before. Ramon, however, wasn't there to humiliate them. He simply wanted them to understand the value of empathy and respect toward others. He explained that, throughout his years, he had learned that a person's greatness was not measured by what they possessed, but by their character and the dignity with which they treated others. The silence in the store was absolute. Rather than prolong the moment, Ramon decided to leave them with a final lesson. He reminded them that in life, every person carries a story in a series of struggles that aren't always visible. They couldn't judge a person's worth solely by appearance, for what truly matters is each person's heart and the respect they deserve. Ramon knew his words had left a mark, and he hoped that, in time, both young employees would understand that respect for others didn't depend on money or appearance. Before leaving, Ramon assured them that the true success of a company isn't based solely on sales but on the impact it leaves on every client who walks through its doors. He pointed out that, in their role as employees, they were also part of that legacy, and that every discourteous, prejudiced treatment stained the vision he had strived to build. He left them with one last warning, urging them to reflect on their actions and to think about how they wanted to be remembered in their work and in their lives. Carlos and Alicia struggled to say anything coherent, unable to find words that could ease the shame they felt. They knew they had missed the chance to show professionalism and empathy, and now Ramon's presence loomed over them as a reminder of how far they had strayed from those ideals. When Ramon finally left the store, the two employees looked at each other in silence, unsure of what to say or how to begin repairing the damage. Carlos was the first to break the silence, admitting that perhaps, without realizing it, they had judged too many people by their appearance. Alicia, still affected by the lesson, nodded silently, promising herself she would never make that mistake again. She knew respect was a principle that should never be forgotten, and Ramon's words had struck deep within her, both professionally and personally. As for Ramon, he walked away from the store with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't sought revenge. He wanted these two young people to learn to treat others with the same dignity with which he had always treated his clients. He knew that a person's true wealth lay in the respect they showed to others, and he felt content knowing he had left a lesson he hoped they would never forget. Ramon walked slowly but confidently through the city's center streets. The bag with the watch, carefully wrapped, hung from his hand, and though anyone might have thought it was just a simple purchase, it meant much more to him. Every step he took, moving away from that luxury store, reaffirmed his conviction that he had acted correctly. Although the treatment he had received from Carlos and Alicia had been humiliating and disdainful, he held no resentment in his heart. On the contrary, he maintained hope that his lesson had made an impact. After all, he knew that change would only happen if those young people learned to look beyond appearances. The experience touched him deeply. He had lived an entire life facing the weight of prejudice and discrimination, first in his childhood and later as a young man when he migrated to the city in search of better opportunities. He vividly remembered the years working tirelessly in various factories, the disdain he received for his humble origins, and the constant struggles to earn respect. Ramon had grown up in adversity, learning through effort and dignity never to let others' judgments define his worth. The watch he now carried was more than just an object for Clara, it was proof that sacrifice and hard work were worthwhile. His mind filled with memories of Clara as a little girl, of all the times he had seen her overcome obstacles with determination. From a young age, she had always been a fighter, and he was determined to support her in every one of her dreams, no matter the cost. Arriving home, Ramon placed the bag on the table and sat in his favorite chair, reflecting on what had happened. Despite the hostile treatment in the store, he couldn't help but feel joy at having obtained that gift. He knew that in a few days, when Clara received it, she would understand the effort and love he had poured into each step of that purchase. He smiled at the thought of her reaction, and a sense of peace filled him. The days passed, and the time to give the gift arrived. Clara, thrilled with the surprise, opened the bag, and upon seeing the watch, her eyes sparkled with happiness. The expression of amazement and gratitude on her face made every inconvenience Ramon had faced in the store disappear from his mind. His granddaughter hugged him tightly, and in that moment, he knew it had all been worth it. Clara valued the gift not only for its material worth but for the love it contained. For her, that watch symbolized not only the celebration of her academic achievement but the unbreakable bond she shared with her grandfather. That night, as Clara and Ramon talked, he decided to tell her what had happened in the store. He explained how the employees had looked at him with disdain and had tried to dissuade him from buying the watch, convinced that someone of his appearance had no right to be there. Clara listened intently, and as Ramon recounted each detail, her expression shifted from surprise to indignation. She couldn't understand how anyone could judge her grandfather that way, a man who had always shown generosity and kindness toward everyone. With each word, Ramon reaffirmed the importance of not succumbing to prejudice. He explained to Clara that, although Carlos and Alicia's attitudes had hurt him at first, he had chosen not to respond with hatred but with dignity. He knew that if he allowed himself to feel resentment, he would let others' opinions disturb his peace. Clara listened, deeply moved, understanding that, in every step of life, her grandfather was teaching her a lesson on how to face challenges. That was the true value she saw in him, the ability to remain steadfast in his principles regardless of the circumstances. As Clara hugged her grandfather, she realized the watch was just a representation of the love and values he had always instilled in her. This lesson resonated in her heart, clearer and deeper than ever. Ramon knew that at some point, his granddaughter would also face obstacles and prejudice in her life, and he hoped that, when she remembered this story, she would find the strength to respond with dignity, always maintaining her integrity. Ramon felt proud to have left Clara something far more valuable than any material gift. His story, his legacy, was his true gift, one that would not break with time or lose its value. That night, he went to bed with a heart full of gratitude, knowing he had fulfilled his mission. Clara would wear that watch on her wrist, but she would carry her grandfather's teachings in her heart forever. As the months passed, the changes introduced by Carlos and Alicia in the store began to be noticed beyond its doors. The transformative experience Ramon had left in the atmosphere was not limited to the employees alone. Customers, now receiving a much more respectful and courteous treatment, felt the difference. Positive comments began to spread, and people, impressed by the change in attitude, spoke among themselves about the renewed experience in the store. The store's reputation started to grow unexpectedly, and more new clients began to visit, drawn by the welcoming atmosphere that had once been marked by elitism and disdain. However, the impact of the incident didn't stop at that single store. After reflecting on what had happened, Ramon made a decision that would bring even deeper consequences for his entire chain of stores. He convened a meeting with the regional directors and managers of each of his branches, including Carlos, who learned, to his surprise, that the company's owner was the same man he had judged and treated with disdain. The news caused a stir among those present, especially those like Carlos, who would never have imagined that someone with such a simple appearance was the head of a luxury store chain. During the meeting, Ramon spoke openly about the importance of respect and the value of inclusion and empathy in every interaction with customers. He explained that, over his years of life and work, he had learned that customers don't just buy products, they seek experiences where they feel valued and respected. That day, with a calm that revealed the depth of his commitment, Ramon presented a bold proposal. Each store would implement a diversity and inclusion training program for all employees, from sales staff to managers. The program included workshops that addressed issues such as eliminating biases, cultivating empathy, and the importance of treating each customer with dignity, regardless of their appearance or social class. Managers and directors, though initially surprised, embraced Ramon's proposal, recognizing the importance of this new vision. Carlos, in particular, realized that he was being given an opportunity to redeem himself and to transform his store into a place that reflected the values of its founder. The story of that day with Ramon became a sort of guiding light for every manager and employee who listened intently to his words. As the training program rolled out across each branch, the employees responded positively. Many began questioning their own attitudes and biases, and some, like Carlos and Alicia, understood that their behavior at work was an extension of who they were as individuals. For some employees, the workshops challenged their ideas and preconceived beliefs. Ramon's story demonstrated to them that appearances can be deceiving and that everyone, regardless of social status or attire, deserves respectful and kind treatment. The change was so significant that, over time, the store chain began receiving recognition for its new approach to customer service. Positive comments on social media increased, and soon, several business magazines took note of the transformation. Ramon, who had always been discreet, neither expected nor sought public recognition, but seeing his stores reflect the values he had defended his entire life provided him with genuine satisfaction. He knew that, in some way, he was leaving a legacy of respect and dignity that would endure, and that was more important than any financial success. Carlos, who had initially shown resistance, became one of the program's leading advocates. Not only did he implement the changes in his own store, but he also worked to spread Ramon's story and his lesson among the rest of the employees. Although the shame of that day still lingered in his memory, he found in this transformation the opportunity to redeem himself and to become a better leader. Alicia, for her part, embraced the new approach, and her treatment of customers now reflected the empathy she had learned to develop after the incident. She often thought of Ramon and how his attitude had changed her perspective, not just at work but in her personal life. The story of Ramon and his unexpected visit to the store began to circulate as an example of resilience and humility. The employees, inspired by the change, shared the story of the man who, despite being treated unfairly, responded with dignity and calm, leaving a lesson that resonated far beyond the store's doors. Ramon's story had transcended, becoming a constant reminder that a person's true wealth does not lie in their appearance or social position but in how they choose to treat others. In the end, Ramon watched from afar as his chain of stores embraced the values he had always dreamed of instilling. He knew that challenges would still arise and that change doesn't happen overnight, but he trusted that, little by little, each employee and manager would understand that dignity and respect for others are the foundations of a successful life and business. Over the months, the impact of the diversity and inclusion training program became increasingly evident in all of the chain stores. Each manager and employee gained a better understanding of the importance of treating customers with dignity, transforming not only the shopping experience but the work environment at each branch. Ramon observed with a mix of satisfaction and humility how his vision was finally bearing fruit. For him, this change represented the legacy he wished to leave, something that Clara, his granddaughter, could remember and be proud of someday. Meanwhile, Ramon's story continued to spread, generating unexpected interest among regular customers. Some approached the employees, commenting on the owner who had come in as just another customer, and who had left a memorable lesson on the true essence of respect. The story wasn't shared as gossip but as a constant reminder that anyone crossing the doors of those stores deserved to be treated with humanity and empathy. Customers felt valued, building trust and loyalty toward the chain of stores Ramon had built with so much effort. One day, during a meeting at one of the chain's main stores, Ramon decided to share some of his thoughts and life experiences with the employees. He told them how he had started in the workforce, facing the same type of prejudices as many others. He recounted the hardships he had endured in his youth, the sacrifices and humiliations he had to bear, and how those experiences had taught him the importance of dignity. He reminded them that every person who entered the stores, regardless of their appearance or circumstances, deserved the same treatment he wished for himself and his family. During that talk, several employees, including Alicia, became emotional. In every word of Ramon's, they felt the weight of a life full of battles and sacrifices, which made them realize how fortunate they were to work for someone who deeply understood the value of empathy. Alicia, with tears in her eyes, thanked Ramon for the opportunity to learn such a valuable lesson. Carlos, listening in silence, felt he finally understood the purpose of his work beyond sales and financial success. He knew this change in his mindset was the result of the lesson Ramon had taught them that day. Ramon's words deeply moved each employee. The story of the humble man who had entered the store and transformed not only his personal experience but the entire company's dynamics resonated throughout. Carlos, who initially had resisted the change, acknowledged that Ramon's lesson had changed him as well. He felt grateful for the second chance, to redeem himself not only to Ramon but also to himself and the customers he might have unjustly judged. Shortly after that meeting, Ramon began receiving letters and messages from employees across different branches, thanking him for the positive impact his philosophy had had on their lives. Some shared personal stories of how the training in inclusion and respect had taught them to set aside biases not only at work but in their daily relationships. Others expressed how Ramon's example had inspired them to treat people more kindly and to value differences rather than judge them. Ramon read each letter with gratitude, and his eyes reflected the satisfaction of having planted a seed of change in each of them. For Clara, Ramon's granddaughter, this story was also a life lesson. Although she was young, she understood her grandfather's sacrifice and perseverance and admired him for facing each challenge with courage and dignity. The watch her grandfather had given her, the very one that nearly hadn't reached her hands due to the employees' disdain, had become a symbol of strength and values for her. Every time she looked at it, she remembered her grandfather's story, the one he had told her, and felt inspired to follow in his footsteps, never giving up and treating everyone with the respect her grandfather had taught her. Ramon found in this experience the culmination of his effort and sacrifice. He had left a legacy within his company, one that, beyond profits and commercial success, reflected his own story and values. He knew that, in the end, what truly mattered wasn't luxury or appearances but the ability to recognize the humanity in each person. With time, Ramon's story became an invaluable lesson for everyone who was part of his company. Every store, from the smallest to the most exclusive, reflected the change that had begun the day Ramon, a man of humble appearance but unbreakable dignity, had been wrongly judged. Though he no longer needed to be physically present at each location, his presence was felt in the respectful, warm treatment given to each customer who crossed the doors. Alicia and Carlos, who had been at the center of the initial mistake, became the main advocates for Ramon's philosophy within the company. Their transformation was so evident that they were even recognized within the organization as examples of growth and learning. In every interaction with new employees, Carlos shared Ramon's story with a mix of respect and humility. He explained that the incident had taught him something no training or book could offer, that the value of a person should never be measured by their appearance but by how they face and respect others. Alicia, for her part, adopted an empathetic attitude toward everyone, ensuring that each customer felt valued, always remembering the impact of a kind and fair approach. One day, on the anniversary of the store chain, Ramon was invited as a special speaker to share his story with all employees and directors. Seeing the room filled with everyone from sales associates to high-level executives, Ramon felt a profound sense of fulfillment, realizing just how many lives his vision had reached. He took the microphone, and with his characteristic calmness, he thanked everyone for being part of his mission, of his journey to dignify every interaction and build a legacy based on respect and inclusion. He recounted that when he started the chain, his goal was to offer not only luxury products but a human experience that enriched each customer, regardless of their background or circumstances. He recalled how, in his early years, he had faced many challenges because of his humble origins and the times he had been underestimated. Each experience of disdain taught him to strengthen himself and respond with integrity, a quality he wished to see reflected in every employee who was part of his company. Clara, listening closely from the front row, could not hide her pride. Tears glistened in her eyes as she watched her grandfather, the man who had inspired her since she was a child, speak with such honesty and strength. In that moment, she understood that the true inheritance he was leaving her was not the watch or material wealth, but his values, his integrity, and his unwavering fight for fair treatment for all. She realized that even when her grandfather was no longer in this world someday, his example would live on in the lives he had transformed. Ramon concluded his speech with a reflection that stayed with everyone in the room. He reminded them that true success is not measured in a bank account or prestige but in the ability to make a positive difference in the lives of others. He spoke of the power of respect, a value that, when genuine, has the potential to transform not only a company but an entire society. He asked them to remember, in every day of work, that real wealth does not lie in luxury products but in the humane and empathetic treatment of every person who walks through their doors. At the end of the event, employees and directors approached Ramon to express their gratitude. Many shared their own stories of personal growth, assuring him that, thanks to his example, they now viewed their work from a completely new perspective. Carlos and Alicia, observing him from a distance, knew that the impact of that day in the store had been one of the greatest blessings in their lives. Ramon gave them one last look, and in that gesture, they both understood that he had forgiven them long ago and that the lesson he left would live in their hearts forever. Years later, the chain continued to thrive, but what truly distinguished it was not the luxury products or exclusive services, but the respect and dignity that characterized every interaction. In every corner of the stores, Ramon's legacy remained alive, reminding everyone that true greatness does not lie in wealth or prestige but in the integrity with which one chooses to treat others. Clara, now an adult and a professional, always wore the watch her grandfather had given her, not merely as an accessory but as a symbol of the values he had instilled in her. Ramon became not just the founder of a chain of stores but the creator of a legacy that transcended generations. His story became immortalized in the memories of those fortunate enough to cross his path, reminding them that respect and empathy are the true treasures that each person can carry with them, leaving marks that will never fade. Over the years, Ramon's story became a true legend among all those who frequented his stores. The example of a man who faced disdain with calm, dignity, and strong values continued to inspire everyone, not only within his network of stores but well beyond. The company, now recognized for its humane and respectful treatment in each of its branches, welcomed an increasingly diverse clientele. For many, entering one of Ramon's stores meant not just acquiring luxury products but experiencing a sense of respect and inclusion that contrasted sharply with the elitist and discriminatory practices of other establishments in the sector. Ramon's philosophy transformed not only the work environment but also how clients perceived the experience of being treated with dignity. Meanwhile, Clara, now an adult and following her own professional path, felt deeply proud of the legacy her grandfather had built. Every time she looked at the watch he had given her, she remembered the story behind it and the values he so fervently defended. With each passing year, the watch took on new meaning, as each stage of her life brought new lessons that always led her to appreciate the serenity and strength with which her grandfather faced prejudice. What began as a symbol of his love and pride had now become a moral compass for Clara, reminding her that, no matter what she faced, dignity was always the most powerful path to any victory. In his later years, Ramon dedicated his time to sharing his experiences and lessons with Clara and the rest of his family. He knew that, one day, Clara would also have to face similar challenges to those he had faced, and he wanted her to be prepared to handle any adversity with the same calm and determination he had cultivated through a lifetime of quiet battles. In many of these conversations, he recounted stories from his youth, of how prejudice and racism had nearly driven him to abandon his dreams, and of how he found the strength to keep going. With each story, Clara came to understand more deeply the roots of the values that guided her grandfather and the mission he had embraced to transform the world around him. With time, Ramon's story of resilience gained public recognition. His chain of stores, now known for its commitment to diversity and inclusion, attracted media attention, and Ramon was invited to talks and events where he shared his vision with new audiences. For many attending these conferences, listening to Ramon was a transformative experience. He spoke with humility and honesty about each experience he'd lived, not seeking applause but hoping that his example would inspire others to be more empathetic. The impact of his words was reflected in the moved faces of the audience, who saw in him not only a successful entrepreneur but a true leader of principles. Despite his advanced age, Ramon continued to visit his stores occasionally, always discreetly, as he had since that day he was humiliated. Many younger employees didn't immediately recognize him, which he preferred. He wanted to observe his team's work without interference. When he noticed that respectful, empathetic service continued, he left with a calm heart, knowing his legacy was safe. For him, every attentive gesture and each satisfied customer was living proof that the values he had planted were taking root, strong and deep, destined to endure for generations. On one of those visits, he met Leandro, a young sales associate who had recently joined the team. Leandro, whose background was similar to Ramon's in his youth, humble yet determined, was a dedicated worker who treated all customers with the respect Ramon so valued. The young salesman stood out for his patience and attentiveness, even with the most demanding customers, something that caught Ramon's attention immediately. Curious, Ramon asked him why he had such a positive attitude, and Leandro responded that he had always been inspired by the story of the company's founder. Although he'd never met Ramon personally, his colleagues had told him about the day when the owner visited the store as a regular customer and taught everyone a lesson in humility and dignity. Hearing these words, Ramon realized how deeply his story had rooted itself in the company culture and in the minds of each employee. Knowing that young people like Leandro were inspired by his example, even without meeting him, was proof that his mission was complete. He bid farewell to the young man with a firm handshake and a quiet smile, feeling that his journey was finally complete. Leandro, in turn, felt honored and strengthened, though he still didn't know that this special customer was, in fact, the company's founder. For Ramon, that anonymity was a reward. He knew his story had transcended his figure and become an invisible legacy that positively influenced everyone. In his last major meeting with the directors and managers, Ramon announced that he would be passing leadership of the stores to Clara, his beloved granddaughter, who was now more than prepared to lead with the values and teachings he had instilled in her over so many years. Clara, emotional and proud, accepted the responsibility, promising to continue her grandfather's legacy with the same respect and dedication. She knew her greatest task would be to preserve the principles of empathy and inclusion that he had established as the company's foundation. In his farewell, Ramon reminded everyone that the secret of success lay in respecting others. Only by doing so would the company continue to thrive and remain strong. Clara took on her new role with the determination she inherited from her grandfather, knowing that every decision she made reflected not only the company's future but also the pride and dedication Ramon had poured into each of his employees and customers. Her first action as the new leader was to reinforce the diversity and inclusion program, ensuring that the culture of respect expanded across all sectors of the company. For her, the greatest tribute she could pay to her grandfather was to keep alive the lesson that human dignity is the greatest of all riches, a value that transcends any product or profit. Ramon, now retired, dedicated his days to writing his memoirs, hoping that his words would inspire future generations. His work was a blend of personal stories and life lessons, and he hoped that one day these memoirs would be read by young people like Leandro, who would find motivation in his words to build a life based on empathy and respect. Ramon felt that, although he was no longer at the helm of the company, his impact would continue to grow, just like the seeds he had planted years ago. In his final days, Ramon looked back with gratitude. He knew that the true value of his story was not in the business he had built but in the people he had inspired and the lives he had helped transform. He passed away in peace, knowing that his story would live on in everyone who had crossed his path. For Clara and all those who had worked with him, Ramon was more than a founder. He was a symbol of silent perseverance and the power of respect in a world often lost in superficiality. In the memory of all, Ramon lived forever as the man who showed that the greatest fortune anyone can carry is dignity. If this inspiring and moving story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future stories. Give it a like, share it with anyone who needs to hear this message, and comment below with your thoughts on Ramon's journey of resilience. We'd love to hear from you. And don't leave just yet. Click on the video appearing on the screen for another incredible story we've selected just for you. Until next time.